Hello and welcome. This is a podcast explaining Ukraine by UkraineWorld.org. We continue our podcasts about the war which Russia started against Ukraine. This series is brought to you by Internews Ukraine and Ukraine Crisis Media Center, two Ukrainian media NGOs. My name is Volodymyr Yermolenko. I am chief editor of UkraineWorld.org. We are making this podcast with Tetyana Ogarkova, who is in charge of international outreach at Ukraine Crisis Media Center. Hello, Tanya.
Hello, Volodymyr.
Before we start, let me remind you that you can support us on Patreon, patreon.com/UkraineWorld. We will try to give you updates about the war right now, what is going on. And one of the key trends is that Ukraine is trying to counterattack, and these attempts are successful.
Yes, indeed. What we see now on the ground is that, for example, in the north of Kyiv, in towns like Irpin, Bucha, Vorzel, they're speaking about that Russian army is surrounding for more than a week already. We see also some successful counterattacks in the south, exactly in the Mykolaiv region and already in Kherson region. And even Pentagon said a few days ago that Kherson is no more under Russian control, which was not true at that moment.
I think that they meant Kherson oblast, basically.
But they told us Kherson, but we see that there is some shelling in Kherson, so maybe there is some preparation for this attack as well. And we also see that Ukrainian army is very much successful in the east of Kyiv, after Brovary. They succeeded to push Russian troops some 20 or 30 kilometers to the east, and then we see some successful attacks in the east as well. But what is important is that yesterday Russian Russian declaration was that the first stage of their operation is over and they are focusing on the second one as they pretended it to be, and it is about east. It's about to enlarge these occupied territories to the whole territory of Donetsk and Lugansk oblast. And maybe we can imagine that they will try to attack more Mariupol to get control over it and to have a kind of a passage to Crimea. And what we see that the level of their demands is decreasing. So if they were talking about denazification, demilitarization of the whole Ukraine, and they were having as objective to replace maybe Zelensky by somebody else, but today they're talking about concentrating on the east. And we see that what they do, they are trying to decrease their demands. What do you think about that? What kind of trend is it? Do you trust it?
Well, obviously you're right that they are downgrading their demands. So the jokes in Ukraine is that we are in the 30th day of Russia's 3-day war against Ukraine. The only major cities they are seized is Kherson, and maybe there will be counterattack on Kherson. We will see what will happen. Ukraine is saying that Ukrainian forces are still controlling Mariupol, despite all the tragedies.
At least a part of Mariupol.
Well, they are saying that the Russians are controlling only the suburbs.
Yeah, they are deporting people from there.
They are deporting people, by the way, and this is also very worrying trends that they just take people from Mariupol, from the regions they control, and move them to Russia, and basically making all this filming, forcing them to say that they are grateful to Russian soldiers, etc. So if you see these reports from people from Mariupol in Russia, well, much probably they're not. People were just asked to do so, forced to do so. We don't know. But generally, we're talking about several dozens of thousands of people already deported from Mariupol to Russia. And this is worrying. Also, there are reports that FSB is, hunting people in Kherson, the active people who are against Russian invasion, and taking them to Crimea. But even today, we have seen that people were trying to gather in Kherson with Ukrainian flags, and the Russian occupants were trying to stop them from rallying by shooting into the air. So, of course, Of course, the situation can be very hard for people in Kherson to continue their peaceful demonstrations in support of Ukraine when you're just shot by Russian soldiers.
And another element important to discuss is that starting from today, according to official information from the Ukrainian side, Russians are shelling much more with missiles and much less with planes. And only one Russian military plane was destroyed by Ukrainian army yesterday. It means that they take no risk to fly over Ukraine, because we can presume that Ukrainian air defense had reinforced in several weeks. And they are trying to make this kind of distant war, so to stay in insecurity and just shelling our cities like they did, for example, yesterday with Lviv. It is not about occupying Lviv. It's not about that their tanks are approaching Lviv. This is just a clear sign to Joe Biden, who was present at that very moment on the other side of the border in Poland, and he was making his speech. And in fact, this shelling took place exactly when Biden spoke, so approximately that during these hours. So it was a clear sign that we are able to reach you quite far away from our border. But no more than that, in fact. So just we can destroy your cities, we can hit any kind of objective on your territory, but without any kind of consequence on the ground. It could be kind of a war for destruction. They still have a lot of missiles, I guess, and they still have the capacity to bombard Ukrainian cities with missiles. But they cannot take control over territories.
Unfortunately, this is probably their new strategy. So they will focus probably on the east, because there is a big part of Ukrainian army in the east since 2014, and they will try to encircle it. And this can be a big problem for Ukrainians, and I hope Ukrainians will not let Russians do that. But for example, on other directions, they are not advancing. They have huge problems with supplies, with fuel supplies, with food supplies. There are many stories, many videos when Russians come to the stores and just loot the stores to get some food, or they come to the village and ask for food. There are stories like that. But we will see what will happen right now. In the northern of Kyiv, there are real big fights. So people in Kyiv hear the sounds of these fights every hour, and we see that there is a clear counterattack on the northern west of Kyiv, as we mentioned, Irpin, Bucha, Hostomel, Vorzel, etc. On our native city Brovary, just some 2 weeks ago, there were fights on the outskirts of Brovary. Basically, Russians were up to enter the Brovary, but now they are driven off some 30 kilometers away. So this shows that the more they go inside Ukraine, into this territory, the more they suffer. And they probably understand it very well, and probably they're shifting the tactics to hit by missiles big Ukrainian cities, but to focus the land operation on the eastern and Donbass.
And today we received information that they at least they are thinking about organizing a kind of a referendum in Lugansk oblast. So they refer to this idea that self-proclaimed Republic of Lugansk is not only this occupied territory back in 2014, but the whole oblast. So they are talking about that. We do understand this is not real, because you can have no referendums during the war. This is a kind of another bullshit idea during the war, but at least they are communicating in their rhetoric. They are trying to focus media attention as well to these eastern borders. And what is important is that they try to present the military operation, what as they call it, in Ukraine like a success, because they have no other way out for Putin to save the face, because he organized all this bloody war in Ukraine more than 1 month ago, and he has to show some results to his citizens. And as far as there is no clear results, because nobody understands where this denazification stops and where it's over, what does it mean in in fact, and where this demilitarization is over. So he has to present something concrete, something tangible, something you can communicate. So maybe really they are trying to present it like, okay, we'll take something, we'll make maybe some corridor to Crimea, it will be our success or something like that. That's the point. But the problem for Ukraine is that this will not be perceived as any kind of possible way out of the war. So for Ukrainian government, for Ukrainians, the only way to stop this war is to get back all the territories, even territories occupied by Russia before. This is the state of things. So there is no room for compromise, in fact, and. Because we already paid a very high price for during 1 month in terms of human lives, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of economy, in terms of suffering of people. Where you were talking about Bucha, Irpin, Vorzel, and other cities. But look, yes, Ukrainian army is counterattacking there, but there is no more cities like Bucha, Irpin, Vorzel partly. There's a kind of apocalyptic landscape. This is not more cities, and we know people, our friends who lost their homes. So it is something dramatic when your flourishing city is transformed into kind of ruins. This is something unimaginable.
Yes, and these cities are really flourishing. Bucha is one of the most beautiful Kyiv suburb, and we really have in our past we were several times a year going to our friends in Bucha, enjoying life incredibly. And these were also people, very very often middle class people, the future of Ukraine. And yes, we are asking our friends if their houses are still there. They don't know, because you have no connection right now. This is the reality. 1 month ago, they were celebrating some things in their cozy towns, in their cozy houses near the fireplaces.
And now, these people, they even after the victory, imagine in several months, we don't know exactly when, the war is over, and some people, some Ukrainians, they go back to their homes, and some, they just have no place to go in this country because their home is destroyed, and they're displaced. They were displaced for security reasons, mostly with kids, and then you have no place to go in this country. So this is something dramatic.
Exactly. And we don't know what will happen to us, right? So while we're recording this podcast, what else? So if Russians really retreat, and there are many signs of it, at least from around Kyiv, the question is what will happen next? What they will do? They still surround Chernihiv, and they are destroying Chernihiv with artillery fire. They still surround Kharkiv. They are destroying Kharkiv with artillery fire, with missiles. So basically, the biggest concern is that they will just destroy everything out of despair, with missiles, maybe with tactical nuclear weapons, maybe with chemical weapons. Unfortunately, we cannot erase any of such options from the table. We cannot exclude it, because.
And I think the problem is that they themselves, they don't have a clear project of what they're going to do, because we think now that their plan was to conquer Ukraine in 3 days, just to take Kyiv or take Zelensky and transform everything in 3 days. And that there were no clear plan B for if they fail. And what they're doing now, it's a kind of a terrible improvisation. They are just they're changing their strategies, their tactics every day according to the situation on the ground, and we really don't know what will happen next. And this is a kind of this terroristic nature of this attack, because terroristic attack is when you never know where and why you will be victim of this attack. So Ukraine, the whole Ukraine feels like a little bit like a victim of this, or potential victim of this terroristic attack.
Exactly, because they created the vacuum of safety. So, for example, until yesterday, you could be feeling more or less safe in Lviv, Many displaced persons went to Lviv from
Most
Kyiv,
of them even.
from Kyiv, because Lviv is a fantastic city with good infrastructure, with good culture, with good restaurant culture, etc. And people from Kyiv who are accustomed to it, of course, they were considering Lviv as their primary destination. So now, I mean, if there are missile strikes on Lviv, what can you expect? So basically, this is their strategy, right? Therefore, Ukrainians are saying Russia is a terrorist state. I mean, nobody believes us. I don't know if people are still hearing us. But terrorism is associated in the world as a kind of a force, anti-systemic force, anti-state force. So if you're weak, if you don't have a state, you use terrorist attack just to seed panic when you fight against a stronger enemy. Well, Russia is different. Russia is a state terrorist or terrorist state. It uses the state for terrorist attack. It uses the state mechanisms, the state institutions for seeding this terror, for seeding this fear. And this is what's happening, that you can be in any place which you consider as a safe in Ukraine. The enemy can be physically 1,000 kilometers away, but you can still die in your apartment in the next minute because of the missile strike.
Yeah, exactly. And this is exactly why they bombard, for example, hospitals and civil infrastructure. This is not to destroy military potential of Ukraine, but to create this terror inside the country, to make civilians flee the country. So they use this tool just to create this lack of security for 42 million of Ukrainians, which are now trying to survive and trying to resist as well. And
also this is what we call a deportation by missiles, because basically they're trying to force Ukrainians to flee the country. They want Ukraine without Ukrainians. They succeeded to do that previously, as we know, because Holodomor was part of the strategy, to have Ukraine as a territory but without Ukrainians. As they were doing during Soviet times, just to bring in some other people from Russia, for example, just to change the demographic structure of a given territory. It's not science fiction. That's what they have been doing in Crimea since 2014. Push those people who don't agree from the peninsula, Crimean Tatars, Ukrainians, even some Russians, then bring people who are loyal to Putinist regime. So unfortunately, this is their tactics, deportation by missiles. But I would say that I'm sure that Ukrainians will not be fearful and will not flee. Those people who fled the country are mostly women and kids. And as you can see, men are willing to defend Ukraine, and women as well. Of course, there are many women in the army. But the land operation, Ukrainian land successes, doesn't mean, unfortunately, that the end of the war can be near, because, as I said, as we were saying, they can just turn to this missile strategy. But we will see. Therefore, Ukraine needs so much, equipment to down these missiles. Therefore, Ukraine is, screaming around the world about closing the skies. Because as you can see, on the land, Ukraine is well prepared. We need to fight, even not these jets, because as you said, the jets, they're afraid to send the jets, but the missiles. We need to down these missiles as much as we can.
Mm-hmm. And that's what's happening. Yesterday there were several positive news. We've listened very attentively to our Minister of Foreign Affairs, Dmytro Kuleba, and he seemed to be quite optimistic about the talks with Joe Biden and without this American-Ukrainian dialogue about what was going to happen. But we do understand that a lot of things are not public at that moment, because Kuleba was very not talking a lot about that, and Mr. Biden was so reserved in his message to Ukraine about this potential clash between United States and NATO countries, NATO's organization, and Russia. But at the same time, time, we understood that there is a clear support of the West towards Ukraine, and they are doing a lot without making a lot of PR about that. And this is important. That's very effective during the war, and there is where we place a lot of our hopes now because of missiles, because of all this aggression in the air and on the ground. And at that very moment, we have no doubts that Ukraine, together with its international allies, will win this war.
Yes, and interesting what's happening in Russia. Actually, there is a lot of talk of Mr. Shoigu and Mr. Gerasimov, who were not public since 11th of March. And for example, we are doing regular monitoring Russian media thanks to our colleagues from Texty.org.ua. You can see it on our Twitter under the hashtag Against Russian Lies. So our yesterday's public publication is that Shoigu was not mentioned in Russian propaganda since 11th of March until 24th of March. For example, our colleagues analyzed RIA Novosti and TASS, two most notorious Russian news agencies. So for almost 2 weeks they were absent from mentioning, and suddenly in the past days, from 24th of March, they get lots of mentions in both RIA Novosti and TASS. Why they get lots of mentions? Because basically Russian propaganda tries to respond to these rumors that there is something wrong with them. Either they are arrested or they have problems with health. And some rumors that Mr. Shoigu has a heart attack. This is just to tell you that probably there is nothing okay inside Russia, inside the Russian leadership, because they understand that the operation in Ukraine is a failure. This was Explaining Ukraine podcast by UkraineWorld.org. Tetyana Ogarkova from Ukraine Crisis Media Center. My name is Volodymyr Yermolenko. I'm chief editor of UkraineWorld.org. Follow us on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, SoundCloud. Follow our Twitter. We are very active on Twitter. You can support us on patreon.com/UkraineWorld. Stay with us and stand with Ukraine.